We're back, episode 2 of the podcast.
Things we learned.
What's the name of the
And
podcast?
oh yes, the podcast is Attack for 20.
Great.
I guess our hosts, you have Yanji, calling Krakow champion,
Yeah,
Tales of
hopefully.
Arya draft champion,
Yeah, I'm the Tales of Aria
money draft.
Scrub Money Draft.
Uh,
So episode 2, uh, we're talking kind of more macro level about Uprising Draft
mhm.
and kind of some of the things that we learned from playing the pre-release, but then also we've done a couple of drafts.
Yeah, so let's start with like just some things we learned about from the pre-release. So basically sealed. I think the first thing we do want to talk about, we mentioned it in the last episode, but pack breakdown. So at this point, hopefully everyone's a little bit more familiar with the packs, but every pack starts with 3 cards that are going to be Draconic, Ice, Generic. We found that these skew towards generic. So on average, you'll have a little bit more generic than Draconic and Ice. Then after those 3 Draconic, Ice, Generic, um, and I say Draconic Ice generic, but it could be like 2 generic, 1 ice. It could even be 2 Draconic, 1 ice. Like you're not guaranteed generic, but overall it skews towards generic. Any permutation but at max you get 2.
Mm-hmm.
Each pack also has 2 rares, or 1 rare, 1 majestic, and then there's a foil, which is kind of like the wild card. And then after that, we're calling it the 2/2/2 plus 1. So it's 2 Draconic Illusionist commons, 2 Draconic Ninja commons, 2 Icelander playable commons. So that could be anywhere from Wizard, Ice Wizard, Elemental Wizard, or just pure Ice. And then 1 extra of those 3 categories.
Yeah,
So a third Draconic Illusionist or a third Draconic Ninja.
and one equipment.
Oh yeah, and 1 equipment. This actually kind of means if you do the math, you kind of break it down. On average, your pool will have about 21 to 27 Icelander playable cards. So on average, about 24. On average, you'll also have about 14 to 18 of Draconic Illusionist and Draconic Ninja. So about 16 on average of each of those. And about like honestly, like 7 to like 11 Draconic cards, which is about 9 on average. And about 10 to 14 generics, or about 12 generics. And then of course 6 equipment. If you actually did the math, that's 24, 16 plus 16 plus 9 plus 12 plus 6. That actually equals 83, and you'll have 84 cards in your pool. Maybe 85 or 86 if you, because in sealed the cold foils, which are actually in the token slot, do count towards your pool. So our math is a little off there, but like those are just good numbers for you to have in mind. 24, 16, 16, 9, 12, and 6.
Yeah, and so in the first episode of the podcast, we said Cliff's Notes if you wanted to just have like a easy heuristic for playing the pre-release or playing sealed in general, you should just play Phi. And these numbers kind of prove out why that is.
Yep. Yep.
Conversely, Michael, you opened a lot of high density Icelander pools.
Yeah, I thought it was just normal. So I was opening Icelander pools that had like 15, 16, 17 blues that were just like Icelander playable. And I didn't realize how good that was until like the guy next to me says, I only have 6 like possible blues that can
Yeah,
be played in
yeah.
Icelander. I had a pool that basically I could go up to 22 blues
Mm-hmm.
using generics. And so I found out that Icelander is a little bit more playable if you do have like a relatively high blue count. It is important that your blue count are blue count non-attack actions.
Yeah.
So this is pretty easy to count. You just count the number of blues that are like Wizard, Ice Wizard, Elemental Wizard, but then you add Healing Bomb, Sigil Protection, Strategic Planning, and Sift. So those are just the blues that are just non-attacks. And if that number is at least like 14, I think Yanji said like for him, if it's not even 10, it's not even worth looking at.
Yeah.
I actually kind of want 14 because like I need like an excuse not to play Fae. Like I'm not looking to try to play Icelander or Dromai. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think,
Um,
yeah, because usually how the games play out, you want to have about like 1 a turn,
yep,
and
yep,
so you need at least 8.
yep.
Realistically, you need like more 10 or more.
Yeah, I say 14 because that makes it so that you have like more turns on average. So you'll actually have 2 blues. Because the play pattern is like I want a waning moon in my opponent's turn,
Yeah.
and then I want an arsenal blue. So that usually means I need 2 blues. You can get away with like a yellow because like if you play a 0 cost from arsenal, then you waning moon.
Hmm.
Um, but then I can't get quell value and blah 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 blah. But yeah. So for me it's 14, but I think if you don't have at least 10, like you're just counting the number of blues that your eye center can play, I think it's like you can comfortably just kind of put Icelander to the side and sealed.
Yeah. And then I think if you want to play Dromai, I think the number of cards that you need to have that are like Draconic Illusionist just have to be like way higher. The part of the reason why you would want to play Dromai is because you opened maybe Semi Vacations. Necria is, I think, the one that we agree is kind of like mandatory.
Yeah.
Uh
That's like the start. We
yeah,
see a Necria, we start looking at Draconic or Dromai a little bit more seriously.
yeah. And then part of the reason for that is Necria is, I think, the only card that Dromai has that generates Ash without really losing value. Actually,
Mhm.
like gain value. So like the Necria
Yeah.
itself is, I think, worth uh around 9 points. They attack for 4 and they attack back and they have to hit it at least for 5
hmm
to kill it. But then also in the process you generate like 1 to 2 Ash.
hmm
And so you're generating like around like at least like 10 to 11 points of value, quote
Yep.
unquote.
Yep. Yeah, and this it kind of pans out. Like on average, you're gonna have 16 Draconic Illusionist cards, and even though you'll have 9 Draconic cards in the pool, almost all of them are just not gonna be that good in Dromai.
Hmm.
Or they're just not gonna be efficient. Like you'll play Flame Call Awakening, but I don't know if you want necessarily to have a Phoenix Flame in your deck.
Yeah.
Um, like you need to rely a little bit more on generic. So if you have like a Scar for a Scar, even Red Trade In, Red Sift, just like kind of like red starters, it does help your pool a little bit.
Yeah, some of
But
the rupture cards are just also just like
yeah, they're just block
don't
threes.
function as well. I
Yeah,
think
so it's like not the quantity of invocations, honestly. Like
yeah,
it's the quality. Like you want like a Necria, any of the other invocations. Some of them, honestly, like we don't think are even that playable.
yeah, like
Miragai or
Miragai,
Mirajai. I don't know how to pronounce it.
yeah, doesn't do enough damage or like threaten enough.
Uvia sometimes just is
Uvia, if you
like
have no Ash, like no way to generate Ash, is just like you spend 2 cards and they can ignore it for the entire game and it'll maybe do like 4 damage. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, and so that's kind of like where we're starting. I think good Dromai pools honestly rely a lot on like which generics that you get. So like if you get like Oasis Respites, if you get like what's it called? Findel's Fighting Spirits,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like things that help improve like your overall consistency. I think like Red Scar, Red Trade-ins are both like
Yeah.
really good for Dromai.
Cards that just aren't embarrassing to play in order to just have your 29 playables or 30 playables.
Yeah.
Because Dromai is just like the hardest to kind of like make work.
Yeah. So this is kind of a good segue when we're talking about draft. So draft is not obviously not exactly the same as sealed, but you can also take a look at how like the number of cards exist for like how frequent they appear for each class and kind of extrapolate that to like how many playable decks there are for each hero.
For sure. I think the first thing we really want to do, so we're talking about draft now, is mentioning that there are 3 less cards in the draft pool.
Yeah. And 3 less cards doesn't really seem like a big deal when you think about it like, oh, the last couple of cards that you pick in each like pack usually they're like not that good or like you can't play them. But I think what it does is it puts a lot of pressure on you to have playables. So for example, if you're drafting Tales of Aria, you get 3 additional cards. You can waste like honestly you can waste like 7 to 8 picks in that format and still be fine. Especially because the equipments aren't as I think valuable.
Mm-hmm. hmm Yeah, and for those who don't know, the reason why we say there's 3 less cards in the pool is you have 42 playable draftable cards
Hmm.
versus 45 of all the other formats. Because in Uprising there are actually 2 tokens in each pack instead of just 1 token, and that's because like one of those tokens can be a cold foil, and those cold foils in draft are not playable in your draft pod. You don't have to waste a pick on them. If you open it, congratulations, you get to keep it, but you cannot play with it.
Hmm.
So, 42 card pool. So because of that, we also think that good generics are a little bit better. Like the generics in this set are, they're all, none of them are like amazing in my opinion.
Oasis
Um,
Respite is pretty good. Like
yes, Red
a lot of the
Oasis
time.
is like a yeah. That card, especially because of the way Quell works. Like
Yeah.
it's one of the ways to kind of really get value from Quell. Um, but most of them are kind of just meh. Like Yellow Healing Balm is like the most middle, the most mids card
Yeah,
in
but
Flesh
if
and Blood,
yeah, but
right?
if you get it like on turn one, honestly, like that card is kind of influential.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in the same way, we find that Dromai and Icelander, in the same way that in Sealed they're a little bit harder to build, in Draft you have to commit to them a little bit earlier. It's almost impossible to pivot, especially into Dromai. And once you start getting into the weeds, you have to prioritize just like playable cards versus sideboard cards. So we're looking mainly at Singe,
Yeah, I think cards like Singe, if you're playing Dromai, like picking, I don't know.
Icelander.
Yeah, I'm saying I'm
Oh,
trying to think of
yeah.
like a similar like if you're in Dromai, like playing cards like Sand Cover, which potentially is like really good against Icelander, but sometimes like if you don't have like Ash generators, it just like doesn't do anything.
The other major point we kind of want to talk about for draft is this concept that I'm calling 1.5, 2.5, 3.5. And those are just kind of heuristic numbers. So this is all theory, but we theorize that every single draft pod, so every 24 packs, has enough cards to support 1.5 good Dromai draft decks. And conversely, that means if there's only one Dromai in your draft pod of 8, that Dromai is going to have a very good deck.
Yeah.
But if there's two, there's going to be some tension depending on the way, who's upstream, downstream of the other person. There could be one really good Dromai deck or one like pretty good Dromai deck and like one like average. But if there's three Dromais, each is just like getting a roughly zero point 0.5 of a good deck, or in other words, each has a pretty bad deck. Um, for Icelander, we think that the draft pod of 24 packs can support roughly 2.5 Icelanders. So the same thing, if there's one Icelander, that Icelander probably has the most nuts deck. They have the pick of the litter. They're just going to play blues and reds, and it's just going to be great. Two Icelanders still can have two really good decks.
Yep.
Three Icelanders, there's tension, and four each gets roughly, we're using this math here, but it's about 0.63 of a good deck. And the only reason I'm saying that is because it's a little bit better than being the third Dromai. And then for Phi, we think that a pod can support roughly 3.55 drafters.
Yeah.
So even with 3 Phi drafters, they can still have good Phi decks. You can still see a Phi mirror in the finals. If there's 4 Phi, there's tension.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's 5 Phi, each gets 0.7 of a good deck. But that's still not as bad as like being the fourth Icelander, third Dromai. In other words, you never really want to be the third Dromai drafter in your pod. It's just like there's not enough cards to support. You're going to be getting sand covers. You're going to have like 6 sand covers in your deck. Like it's just not an
Yeah.
ideal
You're gonna
place to
have like
be.
all like yellow go again attacks, so
Yeah, and blue.
things don't have go again.
Yeah.
That's just
Uh,
tough.
yeah. You also don't want to be the fourth Icelander, but it's slightly better than I guess being the third Dromai. And you don't want to be the fifth Phi, but even then, like, it's just a little bit less bad than being the third Dromai.
Yeah. I think where this information maybe is like a little bit more relevant is we're talking about like committing early. And then but if you like commit, if you kind of pick, let's say you open a really good Dromai rare, you open Necria, you pick it, and then you realize in a couple of picks that you're like the third Dromai drafter. Let's say you get some packs, there's like no illusionist cards available.
Yeah.
So what do you do in that situation? It's quite possible that it would be more beneficial for you to try to just like switch into Phi because the draft just like supports more Phis, and then maybe
Yeah.
you can like make use of some of the cards that you picked in that deck. You really do not want to be the third Dromai.
Yeah. And that kind of is a good segue into something I guess we're calling it the Dromai problem.
Yeah.
So, first of all, this is something that's not going to be a problem in day 2 situations, but invocations being double-sided, it makes for an interesting dynamic in the draft. People know, like if you're a Dromai drafter, it's like unless you have players who either are new, are really distracted, aren't paying attention. Like it's like you will have knowledge of who is drafting Dromai
Yep.
because those people are taking invocations. Most of the invocations are worth taking. Um, period. Like it's just hard to like not take them if you're drafting Dromai. So I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic. It, you meant I know we James White has tweeted actually. I think he responded to someone and he said that's not going to be how it's going to be for your day two situations. Maybe even your day one calling situations. We're not clear.
Well,
Um,
yeah, I think it's most likely that they've come up with like some way where it doesn't rely on you kind of like taking a sneak peek at what everybody else is drafting. That's actually a behavior that's really heavily disincentivized.
yeah,
I
it's
think.
straight up not allowed. Like in
Yeah.
our call drafts for any day two situations, even at the nationals for day one, like judges were coming around, and if they kind of saw your eyes are wandering, they would tell you. And I'm pretty sure if they had to tell you like more than once, you might get like some type of like infraction
Yeah.
penalty.
Yep.
So because they like that's not activity they want people doing, they're gonna have to figure something out. But right now, it does make for an interesting draft format where you do know who the Dromai drafters are, so it's not too hard to make sure you're not the third Dromai drafter.
Yeah.
There's also I have an interesting story. Yesterday we did like a friendly draft, and in pack one or before pack one, we all agreed that every single invocation we open, we're just gonna show to the table. In pack one, we opened 4 invocations. I opened Yendurai, which I think is just like it's like budget Nekriai. Like I'm so happy
It's
having
it's
it.
it's good.
It's not the same as Nekriai, but it's like good enough. And to my right, so who's passing to me, Mike opens Domnia, which I think is like good enough. I'm like, I want to be spicy. I want to try forcing Dromai, and this is kind of the best situation. So I literally wait for the guy who's passing to me to pass to me. The moment I see he does not take the Domnia, I immediately take Yendurai, go to the next pack, take his Domnia, and I have 2 dragons. I feel like I've asserted to my dominance. Then I notice that another guy is taking dragons too, and I end up switching out of it. But it's just like an interesting thing where it's like that should never be a thing, right? I should never like
You
feel
get
like
you get
strategically I
you,
should wait,
you get
see if he's gonna draft it.
bonuses for
Yeah,
stalling.
yeah.
When you're picking, like, it's important that you get enough playables, but what about like equipments? Like they don't count towards your 30 card deck.
Right. Yeah, so that's like the next thing. I think that's the Dromai problem, by the way. It's just invocations being drafted face up. Equipment, I guess our header to this is that your average equipment is better than the average card. And this is a pretty big contrast from Tales of Aria. Tales of Aria had a couple equipments that honestly, like, I never, almost never presented a full suite of equipment in Tales of Aria. Ragamuffin's hat was just a card that's like I didn't value at all. I
Yeah.
never first picked that. Runaways is dead in 1/3 of the matchup,
Hmm.
right? Like it can never do anything against Oldhim.
Yeah.
Um, so the equipment in this set are all better than that. They're all like almost all of them are at least worth a point, and so that's like the generic quell stuff are almost worth at least a point. And if you are able to use them with Oasis Respite, they're worth 2 points. So the way we get that base comparison is we compare it with Welcome to Wraith, which is kind of like a nice core set, Iron Rot equipment, right? Like
Yeah.
those equipments were very clear of how much value they could provide. They blocked one, they did it once. Quell is a little bit like harder to think about, but it is well harder to use, right? But it can be kind of math out the same way in terms of how much value they provide.
Yeah, well, so I think an example that might make it like a little bit easier to understand. So let's say you have a blue that blocks two. If you just use the blue to block two, you're you're gonna get like 2 points of value out of that card on blocking. If you pitch it to quell, let's say like, I get like with Phi, if you're like most Phis attack like 3 times in a turn. If you use the quell and you pitch the blue, then you got 3 blocks out of that blue instead of 2 blocks. And so like that situation is gonna come up, I think, fairly often. So
Hmm.
your quell
Hmm.
equipment is like netting you like a point of damage. In addition to the fact that like some of the things that like fire, like the fire attacks with like a Phoenix Flame, you're just like not going to spend a card to block that, right?
Yep. Yep.
So that's like a point of damage that you were gonna like kind of take no matter what. Now that you have the quell equipment, you can avoid taking it while not losing any efficiency,
Yeah.
for the most part.
You do have to identify spots where you can get value out of Quell.
Yeah.
And one this is a little bit too more advanced, but if your opponent's quelling you, you might want to, arsenal a card instead of giving them that Quell value.
Yep.
But Quell is usually one more life per Quell.
Yeah.
If you can find that spot. If you're playing against Icelander, they're attacking you on your turn, and you
Mm-hmm.
just happen to have one extra resource, you can Quell. And that gains you one life. That's a resource you're going to throw away anyway. Quell is especially good paired with Oasis Respite.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. And so I think like part of the reason why Oasis Respite, like why we say that quell is worth two, when you pair with Oasis Respite, is that normally if you have an Oasis Respite and you want to play it, assuming that you don't have quell, you're either pitching a red to play it, in which case you kind of like quote unquote lost 2 points of value. Or you pitch a blue and then you just have like these two resources left over. And so quell just like provides you like a way to like maximally use all your resources. So the like what you would have lost from playing Oasis Respite, you kind of gain it back. And I actually think that if you're like Oasis Respite, I think we agree it has to be like one of the better cards, like generic cards. Like it's good. You can play it in like all three decks.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of mandatory to have at least as many quell equipments as you have Oasis Respites. So if
I
you,
don't know if I would say mandatory, but they do synergize extremely well.
yeah, I feel like it's mandatory. Like I think if you have two Oasis Respites, I want two pieces of armor with quell.
Sure. And basically what you're saying is if you have Oasis Respites and you don't have Quell, it's really hard to make those Oasis Respites like value unless you're going against Icelander and you also have AB,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um,
Excuse me. The next piece of equipment we want to talk about is Silken Form.
yeah. Okay, so when you get into the class specific qual pieces, which are almost always arms, these are like kind of interesting because they're
They are always armed, by the way.
yeah, they're kind of variable in terms of how many points they can be. So but I guess like before we talk about Silicon Form, like let's talk about Heat Wave because this is a little bit more straightforward.
Sure.
Heat Wave, you can destroy it to increase the power of your Phoenix Flames by one for the turn. Let's say like you're not playing against Icelander and like the only thing that you're going to be using it for is to increase the power on your Phoenix Flames. It's not too difficult to manufacture a situation where you can get 2 points, at least 2 points of power on it, right? Either you draw your second Phoenix Flame, you like arsenal it, and then you use it that turn, or you can like create a situation where even if you only have one Phoenix Flame and you have two go again attacks, you can go like go again attack, play the Phoenix Flame, and then break the chain, play the go again attack weapon, get your Phoenix Flame, and play it again, right? So in that case, like the Phoenix Flame is worth two, and but then
The
like
Heat Wave
or sorry,
is worth two. Yeah.
the heat wave is worth 2 points, and that's kind of like how you guys can think about a way to evaluate how strong the equipment is going to be over the course of the game. But then also, if you have like a third Phoenix Flame, then it goes up to three. If you're playing against Icelander and you're like using it for Quell as well, then it goes like up even higher potentially.
Yeah, if you can like quell one on their turn because you have an extra floating, which sometimes happens, and you get +2 from the heat wave, that's like 3. If you somehow manufacture a situation where you can Phoenix Flame 3 times and quell one, like that's just, pretty
Yeah.
nuts.
Yeah, so I mean like that's like the most straightforward. Like Heat Wave is almost always worth two. So
Yep.
it kind of has like a floor. In addition to like sometimes it just like as a quell piece, it's just like worth two, right?
Yep. Yep.
Uh Silken Form is I think like way higher variance.
Yeah.
That card, if you're planning to like use it, if you Dromai has an issue where it's like really difficult sometimes to generate ash
Yep.
while playing efficiently.
Yep. Yep.
Um, Ash, I
it's very easy to generate ash when you're playing immensely
Yeah.
inefficiently. You're
Well,
pitching 2, 3 reds a turn. Yeah, you're making a lot of ash, but you're not doing anything on your turns.
yeah. Well, let's Michael. What point value would you assign to like an ash? Like how much value do you think an ash is worth?
So we talked about this, I think, in our never to be released episode,
Yes.
and I gave it 0.5,
Yeah.
but I think the game values it at least at 1.
Yeah. I think the game values it at 1, but like if you pitch a red, most of the time you're basically valuing it at 2.
Yes, because you're leaving $2 on like the way I describe it is whenever you pitch a red, it's like going into a store to buy like a 6 pack of like beer,
Yeah.
and then you're just like, I only want 2 bottles. I like I'll pay for all 6, but I'll just leave 4 of them at the counter.
Yeah. So like in this analogy, your payment is the card that you're using. That's the cost,
Yeah,
and you only get one
the beers
resource
are
out
the
of it.
resource.
Yeah, you only get one resource out of it.
Yeah.
So like if you pitch a red on Dromai, you also get this ash, and the ash essentially that costs 2. And how much is the ash worth? Well, if you turn it into an ash wing and you get to attack with it, then you essentially got 2 points out of it. If you don't get to attack with it a second time, if your opponent attacks the ash wing for 1, then that's worth 2 points. However, also they've kind of like priced transforming ash into ash wings at about 1 as well.
Yep. Yep. So it means that like you got to get like almost 3 points out of every Aether Wing to really be what I think the game values them at,
Hmm.
which is like attacking twice and then having it hit, or maybe I don't know, attacking it 3 times.
Yeah,
But anyways, let's kind of focus on the Silken Form, just like the valuation of it.
yeah.
I
So
think because it does just have Quell, we can probably say it has value of 1
yeah,
as a
yeah.
base.
It's worth like 1. The nice thing about Silken Form is that it's the it's the highest likelihood out of any of the other equipments to get like the use out of both the quell and the activation.
Yep.
But if you don't have any ash, it can sometimes you might get baited into like, oh, I don't want to use it for quell. I want to like pick a spot where I can turn into ash wing. And then the value sometimes of that equipment just ends up being like 0 for the entire game. So
Just use it to Quell, guys. It's gonna be okay.
yeah, and so I think in like in these situations like it can be like very beneficial to just to have these like numbers in mind. That way like you can like kind of think when you're moving through the game, am I getting like the appropriate value out of my equipments? And as soon as I think you hit like a situation where you get the appropriate value, you can just like cash it in.
Yeah. Yeah. You might never get that situation again.
Yeah.
So Silken Form, like would it be fair to say has like a base of 1, but you can potentially get up to 4?
Yeah.
But the 4 is a little bit easier to get than pretty much the other 2 equipment.
Yeah, I agree.
And that 4, of course, is a situation where you have pitched a blue, you have an Oasis Respite, so you
Yeah.
get to use Quell, and then before the turn is over, you also, cash in the Silken Form by popping it and making one of your ash,
Yeah.
precious ash, into an Aether Wing.
Yeah.
And that Aether Wing is worth 2
Yep.
because it deals 1 damage and it soaks 1 damage.
Yeah. Conduit of Frostburn. That card is almost always gonna just be like a quell,
Mhm.
except if you also pair it with kind of like the helm, the horn of
Yeah.
ice or whatever it's called.
Yeah. Glacial Horns.
Glacial horns.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's like it can be like pretty difficult to like freeze your opponent's arsenal. I mean, there's some cards that do it,
Yeah.
but in order for
Ice Bind is a common.
Ice Bind. But in order for you to kind of get like the value out of the conduit, like the quell plus like activating it to like use it, like you need to first like freeze their arsenal on their turn, and then or on your turn, and then on their turn you can like pop it. If you do pop it, this has like definitely the greatest upside. Like if you somehow
Yes.
manage to quell and destroy their arsenal card, like destroying an arsenal card is worth 3.
Yeah, just cards are worth 3 in
Yeah.
general. Unknown cards. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I do agree with that, but it's a little bit harder to manufacture, so you'll often just be quelling with this.
Mm-hmm.
I think the most interesting thing is I've played enough games. Like, how often do people arsenal? I find that the only time I'm really arsenaling is when I'm playing Dromai. It's like it's just like I had to have like an all red hand with Faye
Mm-hmm.
to arsenal against Icelander.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, because I would have blocked otherwise.
Yeah. But the situations do exist. So I think
Yep.
it's interesting to bring up. Um, I do think that if you ever can create the situation, let's say like you hit him with an ice bind, you kind of just want to cash that card in, even like without quelling.
Yeah, yeah, agree, 100% agree. And I think the interesting thing with Conduit Frostburn is you do have to activate it before. So even though it's instant speed, you're not like you can't really trick your opponent, I guess. There's no
Yeah.
like attack reaction.
Yep.
So you just gotta go for it. Like if they might have an Oasis Respite in their arsenal, but I would
Yeah.
still do it because the upside is just there.
Yeah.
I think really worth its own talking point is Sash of Sandakai.
Yeah. Sasha Sandakai, one resource. How much damage do you think like one resource is worth?
I think we did two.
Yeah, and I think like the reason why one resource we're saying is worth 2, that's kind of how it's priced into some of like the better cards to use Sasha Sandakai with.
Yep.
So an example turn with Fi, let's say you play a 1 for 4, go again, and then you weapon, and then you play like a 0 cost go again.
Mhm.
And so now you've kind of like done your turn. You've spent your 3 resources. You attack your Phoenix Flame, and you have this like 1 for 5, like a critical strike or breaking point, but you can't play it.
Yeah.
If it was a 0 cost attack, it would most likely do 3.
Hmm.
But because you have the extra resource, you can convert it into 2 damage.
Yep. Yep.
And there's like some other there's some other permutations, like maybe the extra resource, let's say instead of having like a 0 for 3 go again to be like your third attack, you have a 1 for 4.
Oh.
You can like play the 1 for 4 and you can grab your Phoenix Flame. And then so you got to like basically like edge out like two extra points of damage because you had the extra resource.
Yeah. I guess that situation, I wrote that situation in our notes, but that situation would have been the same if you actually ended with the head jab. So that in that situation only gives you +1. But I think it's just like it's pretty easy to make Sash of Sandakai worth 2.
Uh-huh.
Because if you end up a breaking point, sometimes that breaking point is worth 5. You get 2 more damage, and if you destroy the arsenal, just like backbreaking.
Yeah.
And it's just like the tempo of being able to push that extra damage that turn instead of having to smooth out your damage in 2 turns. Like 2 damage, an extra 2 damage on a turn where you're just like 4 card handing them. Sometimes it's worth a little bit more because they
Yeah.
just could not block that damage.
Yeah. I think tempo and like the choice to do the damage this
Push.
turn
Yeah.
versus like arsenaling the card and saving it for the next turn. I think is like a topic maybe we'll cover
Yep.
a little bit more detail later in a later episode. But definitely the value of like sometimes like when you make them block, if you're like forcing them to like block with a card or two, honestly like if let's say like if I make my opponent block 2 cards when I attack for 5, that can be worth more than like 6 damage.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and one other piece of equipment I want to talk about. So Sash is nuts, by the way. Like we didn't say that very like clearly, but it's very, very good.
Yeah.
Definitely pack one, pick winnable. Quelling Slippers is the other piece of equipment. I know we talked about Quell being worth 1 life. Quelling Slippers is the best of the 3 Quell pieces. You want
Yeah.
to talk about why,
Yeah,
Yoshi?
just because there's when you think about like opportunity cost, so if I pick like a quelling robes, by choosing to play the quelling robes, I'm like not playing either the sash or the spellfire cloak. So I'm like
Yeah,
giving up potentially like 2 damage.
yeah,
And so and I might make that back with the quell value, but it's just there's okay, there's flippers,
Yep.
and then there's the arcane,
Stilettos.
yeah, there's the stilettos, and both of those are arcane barrier, but they
Yep.
don't like intrinsically provide like, in my opinion, like any like real value if you're playing against if you're not playing against Icelander and you can't arcane barrier.
Yeah.
Flippers, sometimes you can like
Yeah.
manufacture
Yeah.
value out of it, but it's like very rare.
Yeah. It's like very specific. Like you start with like a yellow lava vein loyalty because
Y-
that's the only thing that you can start your chain with, and then
Yeah.
then you do the rest. Yeah, slippers are just lowest opportunity cost. It doesn't compete with other things in that slot. So it's if you somehow pack one have a choice between the slippers versus the sleeves or the slippers versus the robe, pick the slippers. Slippers is just it's gonna be a more premium quell piece.
Yeah. I would even potentially like pack one, pick one, quelling slippers.
Hmm.
Just
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
I think any hero that you play, like you can just like always just like play that
Yep.
card.
Yep.
Very
Yep.
non-committal.
Yep. Yep. And I guess the only other equipment that we should talk about is Spellfire Cloak. It's just like Sash of Sandakai. You usually can get 2 points of value. The permutations are different because Icelander plays differently, so just trust us. But that's roughly like how we value these equipment. And I think overall, if you think about it, notice obviously we did not talk about the headpiece. Headpiece is just Helios Miter. You don't draft that. You just start with that.
Mhm.
In general, the only thing it's competing with is the Glacial Horns, which honestly, like I don't even want to play Glacial Horns in most of my matchups.
It's
I
like
want to
kind
play the
of it's
Helios
like kind of
Meter.
good against Dromai, I
Mhm.
found. Or if you
No,
can
it's
like
fine. Like if
freeze.
you don't like if you're going first, so you don't really need to even think about having a situation where you pop the miter. Like I think it's fine.
I think
But if you're like
freezing
an
their
Icelander
ally.
mirror,
Yeah, if you can freeze their
yeah,
ally, I
sure,
think
yeah,
that's like the main use.
yeah. Um, But I guess if you just if you assume what we're saying is correct, that Quell's worth one, Silken Form, all these other like pieces of equipment are worth like 1 to like 4.
Yeah.
Like if you present a full suite of equipment and that's only 3 picks, like of slippers, a sash, plus like a Silken Form or Heat Wave, you're presenting like 5 more life points on average, maybe 6, maybe even 7, maybe even 8 than your opponent,
Yeah.
right? You only start with 20 health or like 18 health. Like that is like a significant advantage.
Yeah.
Like it's not just a subtle like 1 point limit. It's like a lot.
I think in this format in particular, even like when we're building our sealed pools, I felt like the biggest difference, like if you have like a really good deck, it's because you have like all the equipments.
Mhm.
And if you are like missing like one or two pieces of equipment, it feels sometimes like doable if you can like keep tempo, but like if in like actual like back and forth games, uh it can make up like the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and what I do enjoy about it is Quell, in order to get like full quote unquote value from it, even that 1 point of value, you do need to like identify the situation. And so I think I like the design of the equipment in this set
Hmm.
because it does reward just knowing the format, knowing what your threats your opponent can likely present, and preempting them. Because the only real way to get value from Quell these days, defensively on your opponent's turn, is to, I guess, accurately assess and predict what your opponent's doing.
You also got, yeah, you gotta commit like at the beginning of the turn. Like if you
Hmm.
pitch a blue, it
Yep.
has to usually be like on the first attack. There's no like
Yep.
waiting. Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe I'll do it.
Yeah. You can't like all of a sudden pitch a blue and Quell 3 times. Nope, it's too late. Like you had to have preemptively done it. You had the extra card. Your opponent kind of sees it as well. But if you've done your homework, then your opponent has to kind of play into it because they don't want to just like not attack you.
Okay.
So,
And so let's
yeah.
talk about our overall thoughts. Week, I guess, one into this draft format.
um, I guess I don't want to be too negative
Yeah.
because that assumes that we are know-it-alls,
Yes.
but we don't particularly love this format. Uh, I think the main reason why is because to us, there's really only 3 archetypes that you can draft. And because of that, the draft just doesn't feel as deep. Like there's no like, I can, I'm in Briar.
Yeah.
I am kind of just like waffling between lightning and earth. And then I realize earth is taken. So I switch to lightning. Like there's none of like you commit to Icelander. And then if you can't you realize you're the fourth Icelander, you just switch to Fae. Because if
Yeah,
you're the fourth Icelander, there's no way there's a fifth Fae, right?
yeah.
Um,
Let's not like in terms. Let's not talk about in terms of like positive or negative, but just like
okay,
in
sure.
terms of like what it is that we're looking for as
A good format
yeah in the
or like
format
a
set
more
that we
enjoyable.
want
Yeah.
that we want.
Yeah.
Um, to me, actually, this format feels a lot like WTR.
Sure.
And I know a lot of people really like WTR. I think partially because it's not as deep. It's a little bit easier to understand
hmm hmm
what you can pick, like what goes in your deck. You there's a lot of similarities where like if you pick like ninja cards, whatever, like they're almost always going to be good in Fi, right?
hmm
And then if you pick like the blue ice cards, like you can play all of them in your Icelander deck. There's no like you don't have to like there's no like feels bad moments where like you are picking I don't know like the thing that comes to mind the most is like let's say you're drafting lightning, you pick a lightning press and you're playing Lexi and then you just realize that this lightning press is borderline unplayable because you can't arsenal it. You just like lock yourself out of
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just like those moments just like don't happen really. Like you can play like all the cards. There's no
Yeah.
like if the card like if the card is playable in your deck for the most part, I think the only exception is Dromai is a little bit less straightforward,
Yep.
but definitely for Icelander for Fi, like if you can play the card in your deck, it's most likely good.
Yeah.
You have a Magic set that you compared this
Yeah.
set to.
So like jumping on that like Welcome to Wraith similarity, even Welcome to Wraith gave me this, but Welcome to Wraith had four generics per pack. So it was a little bit less. Like you could actually kind of like waffle around in the first few packs
Yeah.
because of the nature of the Uprising. There's only like one or two generics, maybe three if it's the foil or the rare. And it's just like you gotta commit early. And this like committing early and putting your blinders on and praying, like this really reminded me. And I don't know how many Magic players there are there, but Ixalan, that draft set. So for those who don't know, Magic the Gathering had a set called Ixalan. It was done after they surveyed a lot of Magic players in terms of if we have like a kind of like a tribal set, what do you guys want to see? And the players voted on pirates,
Okay.
merfolk,
Okay.
vampires,
You're losing
and
me.
dinosaurs. So like as you guys can imagine, like when you drafted this format, like if you drafted dinosaur cards, those cards were not going to be good in the vampire deck or the merfolk deck or the pirates deck. And there were like basically not no cards that were like really good to like flex on.
Yeah.
So you had to commit early. Like you know, you could either commit early, put your blinders on, or like the first four or five picks, like take like powerful cards of each of the tribes, but you know that you're only going to be able to play one tribe.
Hmm.
And I think, you know, Yanji, you're spot on that like this set is very similar to Welcome to Wraith, but even Welcome to Wraith had four tribes, right? Like it had pirates, merfolk, vampires, and dinosaurs.
I would
But like,
argue that Welcome to Earth has the defense reaction tribe and then the everything else tribe.
sure, sure. But like this set, it's like there's just pirates, merfolks, and vampires. There's not
Yeah.
even dinosaurs to like, you know, hedge your bets on, put your blinders on, and try it out. There's
Yeah.
just three, and they're not even like kind of evenly split. Like
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
little bit more like you'll have a little bit more potential cards to go with if you go with face Fi. So
Yeah.
like
I noticed
that's just
that
yeah.
when we were doing our drafts, particularly like for the players that we were playing with that maybe it was like I think it was like their first time playing this set
Yep.
and they hadn't like gone into the spoilers and stuff.
Yep.
I think we were sitting at tables where there would be like I don't know like four Dromais
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
and it just ended up being like um I think like without like the understanding of how like what the ratios are for like
Yeah.
for how many viable decks there are in each like average draft,
Yeah.
it can lead to some feels bad situations.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. I I guess what I think we should end with then is because of the nature of this format, the fact that you have to commit relatively early. I guess I want to encourage you guys as listeners to don't feel bad if you end up being the fifth Vi, the fourth Icelander, or the third Dromai. Like, it's hard to pivot in this format. You only have 42 cards. Sometimes you just gotta stick to your guns.
Yep.
But if you gotta pivot into Fi.
Yeah. Sounds good. So I think we're in the process. I don't know. This might be up on Spotify when you're listening to this episode, but we're in the process of trying to get everything situated. And for listening on YouTube, subscribe. We're trying to hit enough subscribers so that we'll be searchable. Right now, I don't think you can even like search for us.
Yeah, we're not gonna be showing up at all on recommended. I think we need at least 100 subscribers to just be a real channel, and that's okay. We just started. We'll get there.
Okay. All right. Thanks for listening. I think in the next episodes maybe we'll cover a little bit more in detail like card picks, but I know a lot of other people are doing that kind of content already, so we just wanted to give our like overall thoughts.
Yep. See you guys on the next one.